This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the world. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/eyebrowcinema.
Time to die.
I don't know why he saved my life. Maybe in those last moments he loved life more than he ever had before.
Not just his life, anybody's life. My life.
Let's talk about Blade Runner's voiceover.
That's hurt.
If you've only seen Ridley Scott's final cut, you might be surprised to hear Harrison Ford pondering Roy Batty's final act of mercy with all the enthusiasm of a sleepy accountant. But this was indeed how Blade Runner was first exhibited to the world in 1982. Deckard's internal monologue runs throughout the theatrical version of the film, an easy shorthand to explain the ins and outs of the story. It is one of the most infamously bad pieces of voiceover in film history. Some of its failings are readily apparent. Much of the lines are riddled in old-fashioned cliché, and Ford's delivery sounds completely disengaged.
I'd quit because I'd had a belly full of killing. But then I'd rather be a killer than a victim.
These issues make more sense when you learn the ultimate implementation of voiceover was a last-minute mandate from the producers after confused executives and test audiences reacted poorly to early screenings.
And we got the cards. A lot of the people said, they couldn't understand. It was unintelligible. They couldn't follow this. They didn't know what the people were saying. It was kind of a different language. Bud and I insisted that we put some voiceover.
The lines were written in a chaotic manner, recorded without Ridley Scott's input, and without anyone really present to direct Harrison Ford's reading.
He had nothing to fear from Bryant, but a lot to fear from me if he'd killed her. I don't like that. Let's start again.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that bothered you?
No, but I
thought you said that was getting in your way.
No, sir, not.
I'm sorry, I heard you wrong. Go ahead, then.
And while this helps explain why the narration sounds so bad, they're also symptoms of a more dire root cause. Blade Runner was not designed with voiceover in mind. Though early versions of the screenplay do include voiceover in the tradition of the classic hard-boiled detectives, Ford ultimately talked Ridley out of using this technique, and the pair reworked the material to be apparent within the scenes and the dialogue instead. Deckard's narration simply explains the plot in as inelegant a form possible. To illustrate this redundancy, I want to examine each instance of voiceover in Blade Runner's theatrical cut, identify the core information communicated, and indicate how the film expresses these same ideas through more organic and less intrusive storytelling methods. Starting now.
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession. Ex-cop, ex-Blade Runner, ex-killer.
This is the film's big introduction to protagonist Rick Deckard, and it exists for the sole purpose of communicating that he is a retired Blade Runner. Highly redundant given both this scene and the next one tells us the exact same thing repeatedly in dialogue.
He say you Blade Runner.
Tell him I'm eating.
I need the old Blade Runner. I need your magic.
It was quit when I come in here, Brian. I'm twice as quit now.
I'd also argue the audience deserves a bit more credit to intuit things for themselves. Like, the movie is called Blade Runner, the opening text scroll defined what a Blade Runner is, and the top billed actor is mega movie star Harrison Ford. It's not hard to guess this guy's probably a Blade Runner.
Sushi, that's what my ex-wife called me. Cold fish.
This is one of the few bits of Deckard's internal monologue designed to tell us more about the character rather than explain the plot or setting. It's also the only piece of film which indicates Deckard used to be married, so it is technically telling us something new. But that's a superficial detail. The main takeaway here is that Deckard is a cold and distant person, something the movie doesn't need to tell us because it is showing us constantly. Ford's whole performance is built around an emotional disconnect, most evident in how he treats Rachel. Take the scene at his apartment, where Deckard is at first cruelly dismissive of Rachel's false memories, and then clearly insincere when trying to feign sympathy.
Okay. Bad joke. I made a bad joke. You're not a replicant. Go home.
Even their supposed love scene is violent and upsetting. The closest thing to gentleness Deckard ever shows Rachel are the 2 occasions in which he offers her a drink at moments of duress, his own preferred method for numbing his feelings rather than facing them. We don't need to be told that Deckard is a cold fish because we can feel it in the way he treats people. The representation of Deckard's home life also communicates a profound sense of loneliness. The apartment itself is rigid and uninviting, with echoes of brutalist architecture in its monolithic features. The space is typically empty, cast in shadow, and most scenes set here consist of Deckard drinking alone in the dark. It's not clear if this character was ever married before, but it's evident how utterly alone he is now. This is also a good example of how cutting material out of a movie can actually clarify ideas. There's a deleted scene where Deckard visits fellow Blade Runner Holden in the hospital, and while it isn't exactly warm and fuzzy, it does suggest some affinity and personal connection with others. But in the actual film, regardless of what version you're watching, there's no sense that Deckard has any friends or family, or really anything that he cares about.
The charmer's name was Gaff. I'd seen him around. Bryant must have upped him to the Blade Runner unit. That gibberish he talked was city speak, gutter talk, a mishmash of Japanese, Spanish, German, what have you.
The main purpose of this little speech is to explain what city speak is, and unlike the first 2 bits of voiceover, I do kind of understand why the producers felt this a necessary addition. Throughout his brief appearances, Gaff talks in a foreign dialect which loosely mixes several different languages, and it's never explicit in the film what this actually is. But from a story perspective, those specifics aren't really important. What matters is that the language is foreign to Deckard, and to most of the intended audience. This is part of a larger motif in the film, wherein this futuristic Los Angeles has become a hybrid of many disparate cultures. It is an almost overwhelming aspect of the film's mise-en-scène, to the point that even if you don't understand what Gaff is speaking, it's clearly an extension of a broader theme of cultural hybridity.
I didn't really need a translator. I knew the lingo every good cop did. But I wasn't going to make it easier for him.
Deckard says he knows the lingo here, but if that's true, why didn't he use it at the noodle stand?
Give me 4. No, 4. 2, 4.
Talk about plot holes.
Skin jobs. That's what Bryant called replicants. In history books, he's the kind of cop used to call black men.
I get the sense this quick interjection is to clarify that Bryant's use of the phrase skin jobs is indeed a slur. But that also goes without saying. The term inherently sounds nasty and unpleasant, with M. Emmett Walsh's delivery leaning into that harshness. It's also telling that the only character who uses this term is Bryant, who is very much positioned as the archetypical slovenly and corrupt police captain. In addition to being an unnecessary clarification, this bit of voiceover is also crude and sloppy. Comparing anti-black racism to the violence against replicants is not in and of itself incorrect. Replicants are positioned as a metaphor for marginalized groups, and the fact that they are an underclass used as slave labor, then hunted down by agents of the state, does parallel the slavery of African Americans in the US. But the stupefying bluntness of the line is a narrow reduction of the film's themes, compressing the complexity of discrimination and systemic violence into the most basic expressions of individual bigotry. It's also just a really on-the-nose piece of writing, which betrays the film's more visual and poetic exploration of marginalization and oppression.
I'd quit because I'd had a belly full of killing. But then I'd rather be a killer than a victim. And that's exactly what Bryant's threat about little people meant.
Alright, so I'm not sure why the producers thought Brian's comment needed to be clarified at all.
Stop right where you are. You know the score, pal. You're not cops, you're little people.
It could not be clearer that this was a threat. Deckard's belly full of killing is also another example of show, don't tell. His disgust with himself is so apparent in Ford's performance after killing Zora, and he even discusses how retiring replicants gives him the shakes.
So I hooked in once more, thinking that if I couldn't take it, I'd split later. I didn't have to worry about Gaff. He was brown-nosing for a promotion, so he didn't want me back anyway.
This is actually part of the last bit of voiceover, but I wanted to give it its own section, given that analysis involves going on a bit of a tangent. Gaff shows hostility to Deckard throughout the movie that, apart from this line, is never actually explained. Why does Gaff hate Deckard so much? One interpretation involves the popular fan theory that Deckard is himself a replicant. There's not a lot of hard evidence for this, but some suggestive hints, notably this challenge from Rachel.
You know that void comp test of yours? Did you ever take that test yourself?
And this brief glimpse of a glowing eye effect in Deckard, a reoccurring visual motif for replicants and other artificial creatures throughout the movie. We wouldn't get our first big hint though until the director's cut inserted Deckard's unicorn dream, which added new context to Gaff's origami unicorn at Deckard's apartment, suggesting the dream was in fact an implant, not unlike Rachel's false memories. Some fans have taken the next step and suggested the reason Gaff knows about the unicorn is because it's his dream in the first place, that Deckard is a replicant with Gaff's memories implanted. Gaff walks with a cane throughout the movie. Perhaps some sort of injury has left him unable to work as a Blade Runner. Ergo, this replicant has been made to take his place, with Gaff shadowing Deckard to assess if he can do the job efficiently. That's why Gaff hates Deckard, because Deckard was designed to replace Gaff. Certainly makes you rethink Gaff's final summation of Deckard's performance.
You've done a man's job, sir.
I'm not saying this theory is true, or even that it's my preferred interpretation of the text. But it is fun to think about. Exploring this rabbit hole involves really looking closely at the film, and it adds a great deal of intrigue to Gaff's character. It's also that rare fan theory, which actually enhances the core themes of the story. Beyond the big questions of what defines humanity and personhood, this interpretation offers a new perspective on the hatred towards replicants, suggesting said hatred is born out of an anxiety that replicants render human beings obsolete. Gaff resents Deckard, not strictly because he's a replicant, but because this replicant deprives Gaff of his own sense of purpose. The movie AI would make this existential terror explicit some 20 years later.
They made us too smart, too quick, and too many. We are suffering for the mistakes they made because when the end comes, all that will be left is us. That's why they hate us.
And surely, this line of thinking is way more interesting than, oh, actually, Gaff just hates Deckard because Gaff is brown-nosing for a promotion. We don't need to know why Gaff hates Deckard, but the answer Deckard's voiceover gives is crushingly unimaginative.
I didn't know whether Leon gave Holden a legit address, but it was the only lead I had, so I checked it out.
This line comes as Deckard is investigating an abandoned apartment, and just after we've seen him driving while listening to Leon's interview, where Leon talks about the apartment he lives in.
That's the hotel. What? Where I live. Nice place? Yeah, sure, I guess.
So, this is clearly Leon's apartment. That information did not need to be clarified.
Whatever was in the bathtub was not human. Replicants don't have scales. And family photos? Replicants didn't have families either.
Less essential than the literal observations made here is simply signaling to the audience that the scale and the photos are important. But basic filmic language already communicates this. What does a close-up of an object say if not, hey, pay attention to this thing, it's important? And we also see Deckard collecting both objects as evidence. Even if we don't yet get why, we'll later see Deckard examine the photos in far greater detail, as well as inquire about what exactly the scale is. Both are crucial steps in Deckard's path to finding Zora. All the audience needs here is a little patience.
Replicants weren't supposed to have feelings. Neither were Blade Runners. What the hell was happening to me?
The gradual reveal that replicants are thinking and feeling beings rather than just autonomous machines has already been imparted in Rachel's own desperation and sadness upon discovering that she isn't human. We can see that she's sad. We don't need the movie to tell us. We also know this depth of feeling is not how replicants are perceived in society, told by the opening text, which stresses that killing a replicant is not execution, but retirement, and in Deckard's own callous description of replicants.
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
We also don't need a hint that Deckard is starting to develop feelings for Rachel. We see the guilt in his face when he reflects on how his words hurt her.
Leon's pictures had to be as phony as Rachel's. I didn't know why a replicant would collect photos. Maybe they were like Rachel. They needed memories.
Let's put a pin in this one for now.
The report would be routine retirement of a replicant, which didn't make me feel any better about shooting a woman in the back.
God, it's fascinating how little faith the producers had in Blade Runner's filmmaking to tell the story. Watching Zora crash through plates of glass in slow motion as her body is ripped apart by gunfire against the haunting Vangelis music, it is clear that this is not retirement, but execution, and that it's barbarous and cruel. And it is equally clear that Deckard is realizing this too. Consider how much time the film gives to shots of Zora's corpse, and to Deckard looking on. Harrison Ford demonstrating disgust and anguish within himself just through his facial expressions. It is one of the most palpable depictions of murder I've ever seen in a movie. And the notion that the audience wouldn't get that unless Deckard told them is baffling.
There it was again. Feeling in myself. For her. For Rachel.
It is also very bizarre that Deckard feels the need to bring up Rachel here. I get that his burgeoning relationship with Rachel has stirred newfound empathy for replicants, but the film did not need to draw this fine a point. I'm reminded of when stories of sexual harassment against women come out, and those guys who say things like, "Hey, that's not okay. My wife is a woman." The violence can't be legitimized until it's explicitly linked to someone Deckard knows personally. From here, the film actually goes a long stretch without any voiceover whatsoever, and it's magical stuff. We're left to simply take in the rich visuals and enchanting music without Ford's lackadaisical monologuing to kill the mood. But the film is in fact just saving itself for the most soul-shattering piece of voiceover yet. Here we go, the moment you've all been waiting for.
I don't know why he saved my life. Maybe in those last moments he loved life more than he ever had before. Not just his life, anybody's life. My life.
I mean, what do I even say? As with Zora's death, this is another thuddingly tone-deaf summary of self-evident emotional context. Roy's serenity and grace in facing death is so beautifully felt through Rutger Hauer's performance, guided still by the gentle score.
All he'd wanted were the same answers the rest of us want. Where do I come from? Where am I going? How long have I got? All I could do was sit there and watch him die.
We certainly don't need Roy's desire to live explained. If there's one thing the movie has made abundantly clear by this point, it's that Roy and the other escaped replicants are looking to extend their short lives.
So they built in a fail-safe device.
Which is what?
4-year lifespan.
My birthday's April 10, 2017. How long do I live?
4 years.
Similar problems.
Accelerated decrepitude.
If we don't find help soon, Pris hasn't got long to live. I want more life. Fucker.
The deeper issue here, though, is less the redundancy and more how the voiceover shades Deckard's character. These lines aren't coming from an omniscient third party after all, they are the thoughts of our protagonist, intrinsically revealing aspects of his character. And that's a detriment, because they make Deckard sound kind of stupid. Let's talk about how Deckard rationalizes Roy's act of mercy.
Maybe in those last moments he loved life more than he ever had before. Not just his life, anybody's life.
There is truth to this reasoning. Roy saving Deckard is informed by an epiphany of life's value. Facing death makes Roy see how precious life is in the first place, a significant point of growth for a character who, like Deckard, has killed throughout the story. But there's another element at play here. Roy's dying words are specifically concerned with his memories, and the notion that when he dies, all the moments that defined his life will disappear with him.
Like tears in rain.
Up to this point, the film has demonstrated how crucial memories are to replicants in defining their sense of identity and their worth as living beings. Now, those experiences are inevitably going to slip away, but if Roy can save Deckard, at least someone will remember. If Deckard lives, a small part of Roy endures through memory. And for Deckard to bear witness to this profound vulnerability, the near sacred bond which now binds Deckard to Roy, and respond, "Well, I guess you just loved life a whole lot," is devastating. The guy seems to barely grasp the significance of what he's been a part of. This is also where my pin from line 9 comes back into play.
I didn't know why a replicant would collect photos. Maybe they were like Rachel. They needed memories.
He's not wrong in noticing how important memories are to replicants, but the articulation is so clumsy that it undermines his character. I get that a large part of Deckard's arc is slowly coming to see replicants as people and not just machines, but when that story is rendered in the most blunt and basic emotional observations, it loses its poignancy. In this regard, the voiceover does more than just kill the mood. It cheapens the entire film by reducing its themes and emotional through line to their most simplistic forms. The final piece of voiceover comes from the studio-mandated happy ending, where lovers Deckard and Rachel drive through beautiful mountain landscapes, awash in greenery and bright blue skies. If you're thinking this feels like it's from a different movie, that's because it literally is. All the helicopter shots were leftover outtakes from The Shining, specifically the car ride up the mountains. I could go on and on about the ways in which this ending completely betrays the film which preceded it, and especially Deckard and Rachel's relationship, but I promised to stick to the narration.
Gaff had been there and let her live. 4 years, he figured. He was wrong.
First, clarifying that Gaff had indeed been at Deckard's apartment is hilariously redundant. Even if the audience had somehow missed the motif of Gaff's origami, the soundtrack includes an echo of Gaff's line a scene earlier.
Too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
Coupled with Deckard's look of recognition, it's clear as day that Gaff was indeed here, and that he let Rachel go.
Tyrell had told me Rachel was special. No termination date. I didn't know how long we'd have together. Who does?
Deckard claiming that Tyrell had told him Rachel was special is not supported elsewhere. I mean, Tyrell did say that Rachel was an experiment, but the full context of the quote was,
"Rachel is an experiment, nothing more."
Which sounds kind of like the opposite of being special. This also introduces a massive plot hole, given it seemed impossible to extend Roy's life more than 4 years, but whatever. The bigger issue here is that the ambiguity over how much time the characters have together was already present explicitly in the text. We don't know when Rachel was built. She might have 4 years left. She might only have 4 months. It's not surprising that later cuts of the movie have excised this ending entirely. The sense of journeying into an unknown future together is just as palpable in the elevator outside Deckard's apartment as it is in the mountains. These are the core issues with the voiceover which accompanied Blade Runner's theatrical release. It tells what the movie already shows, and in doing so, crushes the delicate emotional tenor and thematic depth the filmmaking achieves elsewhere. It's quite bad, but I do find it worth listening to. For Blade Runner fans, the narration is fascinating as a historical curiosity, and does invite looking at the film in a new way. It's certainly not how I'd want anyone to experience Blade Runner for the first time, but as an experience, it does carry value. There is likewise value in examining how Blade Runner's voiceover fails to better appreciate and understand the movies which make excellent use of the technique. One of the great masters of first-person narration in film is Terrence Malick, whose meditative voiceovers greatly enhance the mystery of his movies. This is especially true of Voyage of Time, Malick's recent documentary which ponders the past and future of humanity within the universe, mixing some typically gorgeous Malick visuals with enigmatic voiceover from Brad Pitt. You can watch Voyage of Time right now on Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service where you can watch some of the most beautiful and incredible works of cinema from around the world. Every day, Mubi premieres a new film. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. And these movies don't come from a faceless algorithm, but are handpicked by actual human beings. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere. And the best part? If you want to watch Voyage of Time, or any of the countless amazing movies currently streaming, you can get a whole month of Mubi for free right now. Just head to mubi.com/eyebrowcinema for a free 30 days. That's a whole month of great movies for free.